when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? I don't know. But we're partly responsible for that, aren't we? Today is a celebration for us in this parish because Friday was St. Luke's Day. St. Luke's Day comes every year on a certain day, and it's one of the saints' days. And since St. Luke is our patron saint, we celebrate St. Luke's Day today. And I thought it would be good for me to try to talk with you a little bit about who Luke was and who we are, because I think those two things are partly dependent upon each other. Luke, as you know, was one of the four gospel writers, and there are some things about the Gospel of Luke that are different from the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and John. Only in Luke do we hear the story of the Annunciation to Mary, the story of faith of Mary, how Mary said yes to the angel when the angel told Mary that she was going to bear the Christ child. Only in Luke do we hear about the visit that Mary made to Elizabeth, who at that time had John in her womb, and the two stories that they shared with each other about their lives. And I want to say something more about the stories of our lives in a little bit. Only in Luke do we hear about the angelic host appearing to the shepherds, telling the shepherds the story of Jesus and who Jesus was. In Luke, there are 6 miracle stories and 18 parables that are not recorded in any of the other Gospels. And one of the things that I think is the most important about Luke is that Luke is not only the writer of the Gospel of Luke, he is also the author of the book of Acts. And Acts is particularly important in our faith because Acts tells the story. Acts tells the story about the coming of the Holy Spirit to the people at Pentecost and how those people struggled in the first years of Christianity. Tell the story of the martyrs, Peter and Paul, and what they went through and what they suffered as a result of their desire to proclaim the gospel to all of the world in that region at the time. And then it also talked in Acts about the conversion of a number of different people through baptism to the faith that they would then announce to the rest of the world. And basically the story of Acts answers this question: who will extend this church in future years? So I'm going to ask that question at the end of this sermon. Who of us will extend this church in future years? We had yesterday what's called a vestry retreat. And in that time, from 10 o'clock yesterday morning till 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, all of the vestry members and I had a conversation that was facilitated by this wonderful woman from our diocese whose name is the Reverend Joanne Izzo. Joanne was a friend of mine in seminary, and she is an extremely dedicated, articulate woman who knows about church building and church growth and church structure, and knows about the things that can help propel churches into the future and help us build a strong future together with each other. So she facilitated this discussion with us, and it was interesting because one of the first things she had us do, even before the session, was to take for ourselves this Myers-Briggs study. Have any of you ever taken the Myers-Briggs? Very enlightening, a little bit surprising at times. And I won't tell you about all of the people on the vestry and who they are. I will let them tell you that. But I will tell you that I was the only one that had the initial P at the end. And what I was told by Joanne that means is that I'm rather overly enthusiastic and perhaps even overly optimistic, which does say a few things about me. which tells me that I need sometimes to temper my enthusiasm and my optimism with a little more realism. So that was part of what we were doing yesterday. But it was a fun exercise to get started, but it wasn't just fun, it was very instructive as to who we are and how we operate and how we perform in our church activities with one another. So it's all about what we have accomplished in the last 185 years here in this parish, and what we hope to accomplish and how we hope to accomplish it in the days coming. And that's what the purpose of yesterday was all about. So let me talk with you a little bit about the last 2 weeks for me. I was on vacation week before last, and that gave me some time to ponder who we are, who I am, who those people are around me, and how we can use what we have and build on that future. And I did a lot of contemplation of that, assisted by a dose of tequila or two. And I had some really good thoughts. I had some really good notions and some really good prayers about where we are going as a parish and how we will do it. And I thought so much about the good things that have gone on in the last year that I've been here, that I've been aware of what's happening in this parish, as well as the good things that preceded me before I came. And I had a chance also to ponder a little bit about some of the times that we've been through here in this parish that may not have been so good. So we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be having that dialogue as the weeks and months go on, because who we have been as a parish also shapes who we are as a parish and as individuals. As Joe mentioned a couple of weeks ago, and Stephen mentioned when he was preaching, that we all have our stories. We all have our individual stories, and those stories affect who we are and how we operate together as a parish and how we nourish each other. And so we'll be talking some more about that. Next week, Sue will preach. The week after that, Mike will preach. And they'll tell you something about themselves. And this is all part of an effort for us to get to know each other better. We had a session this morning at 9 o'clock in which 10 people were present, and we shared stories about ourselves, and we shared stories about things in our individual lives that give us joy and how we achieve that joy despite some times in our lives that are not necessarily seen as joyful. So I want to ponder with you some of those things as we go forward. One of the things that we do here is each Sunday we come together and we worship and we nourish each other. Some of those times can be rather perfunctory and rather shallow, because we often don't want to show ourselves for who we are. Some of those times can be deeper and more nourishing, because we do want to show each other who we are. This is not about coming together and have a kumbaya with everyone. This is about nourishing each other as a congregation and as a community of faith, so that we can be beacons of hope for each other, that we can create an environment where all of us feel safe and comfortable, that we can all be transparent with each other and have honesty with each other about who we are, where we've been, and where we're going. I see so much talent and energy in this community, and that has been the case here on many occasions over the years, but it hasn't always been the case here. So we will continue to have discussions about who we are, why it has been good at times, and why it hasn't been quite so good at times. And we can't deny those times. We can only try to change them and build upon the good things that have gone on in this parish. And in the history of St. Luke's, which comprises about 185 years, you can imagine that times weren't always great. And so I got this little book out the other day, The History of St. Luke's, at the sesquicentennial celebration in 1985. a history of the church. One of the first things that it talks about in this history of this church is this. It says, the Reverend Alexander Fraser, and this is in 1839, questioned the motives and commitments of the people in the parish. And in a letter to the wardens and the vestry men, of course men, but no vestry women, vestry men, in 1835, he wrote that all engagements between him and the vestry would cease in 3 months. He stated that the reasons were that in spite of his labors to build up the church in Somers, he had labored in vain. That the situation of your affairs at Somers, he never would have been their minister had he known them before he came. That the offers chosen at the meeting were not even communicants of the church, and that the supporters of the church seldom attended services. That his disillusionment with these men was undoubtedly heightened by the fact that his courtship of a young lady in the parish was unacceptable to her father. So we aren't the first ones that have had issues and troubles sustaining our faith and sustaining a parish in the midst of that. But there were other good times, and there have been other good times, and we all know about those, and we know that history. But part of ferreting out who we are and where we're going is knowing that history and understanding it and understanding how we can nourish each other. And part of that for me is something that I've been really, really fortunate to be able to do over the last year. That is to get to know so many of you individually who have come to my office and shared with me things about your faith, things about your journeys, things about where you've been and your history, your hopes, your dreams, your troubles, your failures, your families, and those things that make you who you are. And so as we go forward, I believe that we will continue to do that. And you have placed so much of your trust in me, and I hope that you will continue to place your trust in me, and I will do my very best to sustain that trust and earn it and continue to get it from you. One of the things that was done in this church happened in 1839, and it's that window right there. It was donated by a very generous parishioner at that time, and one day I'm going to give a sermon just about that. That's a beautiful heirloom that we have in our church, and I want to honor it by talking with you about what it is and what it says about us. But I want to tell you a funny story. The other day, Tuesday, I was here in the office. I'd been in the office Monday and Tuesday, working most of the day trying to get ready to get everything done for here so that I could leave and go to West Virginia. And early Wednesday morning, I left for West Virginia, and Kevin Sweeney went with me. We had a wonderful time spending time talking with each other and about the parish and about our lives, and it was a really good time to get to know him, and he was a big help to me on this trip, and I'll tell you more about that later. But Tuesday afternoon, I was getting ready to leave, and one of our parishioners called me and asked if she could come by and see me, and I said, sure. And so I was waiting for her to get here, and she walks in the door, the side door, and right behind her walk in 4 Somers policemen with their cars outside and the lights going like this and the sirens whirling and all of that. And they said, we need to talk to the priest. Well, I had my collar on. They were looking at me, and so I said, that's kind of me, so you can talk to me. They had a report, and I won't even tell you about who the person was, but they had a report that someone had stolen the remains of a decedent from right out here in our columbarium. Well, as they told me the story, I realized that I already knew the story and that no one had stolen the remains, and there was a very good explanation for why the remains weren't there. But it occurred to me that the origin of the story was a story of mistrust. There was a story of mistrust about what had happened out there and who was responsible and how it could be remedied. And so it struck me that trust is such an important thing for all of us, individually, with each other in our personal relationships, and as a community, that one of the most important things that we can do is establish and build and sustain and nourish and increase the trust that we have for one another. And so what I'm doing this year is a little bit different from last year. I never gave a sermon last year about stewardship. And the reason that I didn't was because I didn't come here until September the 23rd of last year, and I didn't want my first month to be talking about money. And so I didn't give a sermon about stewardship, and I'm not going to give a sermon about stewardship this year other than to say a couple of things. And it's this, that we are stewards of each other. We are stewards of this place. We are stewards of this building. We are stewards of the community. And it's not just about money. It's about our faith in one another. It's about our trust in one another. And I think we're asking of each other the same question that I said that Luke was talking about in Acts, and that is, who will extend and nourish the church in future years? We're asking the same question of each other that we've asked of each other for the last 185 years here at St. Luke's, but we're also asking the same question that Luke was trying to answer in Acts nearly 2,000 years ago. Now, who will extend the church in the future years? And even a deeper question, what does it take to extend the church in future years? And I think that is answered by the question that Jesus asked in today's gospel lesson. When Jesus returns, will Jesus find faith in the community? And I think it depends on where he shows up. And I hope that Jesus shows up here, because I think if he shows up here, when he shows up here, he will have the answer to that question. But the answer is not going to be provided just by him. It's going to be provided by us as well. And that answer will be given to us based upon our trust in each other, based upon our transparency with each other, based upon whether or not we can rely upon and believe each other, and whether we feel held, and whether or not we succumb to those things that constitute something other than love, whether we succumb to those things that constitute power and control, or whether we listen to the love that Jesus tells us about in the gospel lessons. Personal safety, trust, and most important of all, if we can do what we talked about last Sunday when we baptized a brand new baby Christian, and that is to recite to each other that we will trust in the fact that God wants us to show that every person is worthy of human dignity. And if we can do that, and if we can ask for, as we did last Sunday, God's help, if we can realize that we can't do it without God's help, then we will go a long way toward answering that question of what Jesus will find when he returns. Whether he walks in that back door or this door, or whether he walks into the center of Somers, or whether he walks into any other part of the world, what will he find? And we are the ones that are to answer that question. And we answer it for each other every time we come in here. And we answer it for each other every time we get together every time we do mission work, every time we work on behalf of the church as a vestry, as anyone participating in anything, is whether we can look at that goal and say, are we creating a space where when Jesus returns, he will find that faith? It's all up to us. But you know what? It's not really that hard. It's not really that hard, because all we have to do is get rid of our fears. All we have to do is get rid of thinking of each other as an outsider or a threat. We need to be able to love and trust in that promise. And if we do, we will know the answer to that question.